If you walked down a certain street in London in the 1690s and looked around, you wouldn't see a single stock exchange sign, not a single bank building. But in a smoky coffee house on that same street, you could double your fortune in an instant or lose everything you had in one breath. Sounds absurd, right? And yet, the roots of the New York Stock Exchange, of the London Stock Exchange, of every trillion-dollar deal made today, trace back to exactly these smoky, noisy, ruleless rooms. There was no official building, no regulatory board, just a system built on trust, rumor, and sometimes pure luck. Today, I'm going to tell you one of the strangest, most human, and most dangerous stories in the history of finance. Let's get started. Let's go back to the second half of the 17th century. Coffee was an exotic drink that had only just started trickling into Europe from Ottoman lands. London's first coffeehouse opened in the 1650s, and the city fell for this new drink almost instantly. But here's the real twist. People weren't going for the coffee itself, they were going for what got said inside. You paid a penny, walked through the door, and in that instant, you gained access to the freshest news, the latest gossip, the hottest trading tips in the city. People at the time didn't call these places penny universities for nothing. For 1 penny, you got an education worth a university degree minus the diploma. This is exactly where a street called Change Alley enters the story. Tucked into the heart of London, a narrow, dim little alley. But by the late 17th century, this alley had become the place where the pulse of the financial world beat the loudest. His most famous stop was Jonathan's Coffeehouse. This wasn't an ordinary coffeehouse. It was the natural habitat of what were called stock jobbers, the men who traded shares for a living. Most of them didn't even sit down. They stood, paper in one hand, coffee in the other, shouting out prices, buying and selling shares of the East India Company. Just think about it. Shares of one of the world's first publicly traded companies were changing hands with no official board, no oversight, nothing but the trust the people in that room placed in one another. Unlike today's algorithmic trading screens, everything here ran on eye contact, tone of voice, a handshake, and reputation. So how did all this chaos turn into something like order? This is where a real documented name enters the picture, John Castaing. In 1698, this man began publishing a weekly list inside Jonathan's Coffeehouse. It was called The Course of the Exchange. This list showed which stock had traded at which price that week, and how much each commodity had sold for. Sounds ordinary, doesn't it? But according to the historical record, this is the first regularly published written stock price list in history. So the stock trading app on your phone today has its roots in a single sheet of paper left on a coffeehouse table. Every time I think about that, it genuinely gives me a small chill, because sometimes the biggest systems in the world grow out of the most humble beginnings. Now let me tell you a second story, this one carrying a bit more sea salt. Right next to Change Alley, there was a coffee house run by a man named Edward Lloyd, opening its doors in the late 1680s. Do you know who Lloyd's regulars were? Ship captains, merchants, insurers. Back then, when a ship set off for India or the Americas, no one could be fully certain it would ever come back. Storms, pirates, disease, anything could happen. The people who turned that uncertainty into opportunity gathered right inside Edward Lloyd's coffeehouse, telling one another things like, "I'll take on part of the risk if the ship is lost, and in return, you pay me a premium." That simple handshake grew over time into what is still one of the largest insurance and reinsurance markets in the world today, Lloyd's of London. So ordinary conversations that began around a cup of coffee turned over 300 years later into an institution still standing today. I honestly think this is one of the most extraordinary legacies in financial history. Now let's turn to the darker, more dramatic side of the story. The year is 1720, and we're looking at the South Sea bubble that infamous financial collapse history remembers so well. Shares of the South Sea Company inflated at an unbelievable pace within months, and everyone rushed to Change Alley chasing dreams of instant wealth. The coffee houses were absolutely packed, with people lining up at the door just to catch a whisper of the latest stock rumor. And this is exactly where we run into a very real human story, Isaac Newton. Yes, that Newton, the man who discovered gravity. Newton got into the bubble early, made a profit, and got out. But when he saw everyone around him still making money, he couldn't resist and went back in with a far larger sum. When the bubble finally burst, Newton lost an amount worth millions of dollars in today's money, and legend has it that he later uttered the famous line we still quote today: "I can calculate the motion of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Just think about that. Even one of the smartest men who ever lived couldn't resist the pull of that coffeehouse wind, that crowd-driven excitement. And that tells me something important. Financial bubbles were never just about numbers. They're one of the rawest, most exposed expressions of human psychology. So what does all of this tell us today? I think the most striking point is this. The stock market, that cold digital world crammed with numbers, actually started out as a deeply warm human story. It was a network built on trust, gossip, excitement, greed, and sometimes plain honest friendship. Today, when you buy or sell a stock in seconds from your phone, you're really just using the continuation of that primitive system, built by people trusting or not trusting one another in the corner of a coffeehouse over 300 years ago. Even when the London Stock Exchange finally got an official building and a rule book in 1801, that coffeehouse spirit, that informal network of trust, never truly disappeared. It just changed shape. While watching this, maybe you found yourself wondering, where are today's coffeehouses? Social media groups? Trading forums? Or a stock tip circulating endlessly in a WhatsApp chat? They say history repeats itself, and maybe they're really onto something. If this story caught your interest, I'll take you to another forgotten corner of financial history next time. Until then, take care of yourselves, and remember, sometimes the biggest institutions in the world are born around the most humble cup of coffee.